That awkward moment when a parent walks in and you're reading Hatchet to the computer screen. Embarrassing. No, I'm just kidding. That was fine. So anyway, continuing on chapter 17. Okay, so he had to get the hatchet back. He had to dive and get it back. But how deep was it? In the deep end of the gym pool at school, he had no trouble getting to the bottom, and he was pretty sure, about 11 feet. Here it was impossible to know the exact depth. The front end of the plane, anchored by the weight of the engine, was obviously on the bottom, but it came back up at an angle, so the water wasn't as deep as the plane was long. He pulled himself out of the water so his chest could expand, took 2 deep breaths. Do that right now. Swiveled and dove, pulling his arms and kicking off the raft bottom with his feet. The first thrust took him down about a good 8 feet, but the visibility was only 5 feet beyond that, and he could not see bottom yet. He clawed down 6 or 7 feet, the pressure pushing in his ears until he held his nose and popped them, and just as he ran out of breath and headed back up, he thought he saw the bottom. Still 4 feet below his dive. He exploded out of the surface, bumping his head on the side of the elevator when he came up and took air like a whale. The stale air, pushing the stale air out as he wheezed, taking new in. He would have to get deeper yet and still have time to search while he was down there. Stupid, he thought once more, cursing himself. Just dumb. He pulled air again and again, pushing his chest out until he could not possibly get any more capacity. Then he took one more deep lungful, wheeled and dove again. This time he made an arrow out of his arms and used his legs to push off the bottom of the raft. All he had in his legs to spring, snap, and propel him down. As soon as he felt himself slowing a bit, he started raking back with his arms at his sides like paddles and thrusting with his legs like a frog. This time he was so successful that he ran his face into the bottom mud. He shook his head to clear his eyes and looked around. The plane disappeared out and down in front of him. He thought he could see the windows, and that made him think again of the pilot sitting inside, and he forced his thoughts from it, but he could see no hatchet. Bad air triggers were starting to go off in his brain, and he knew he was limited to seconds now. But he held for a moment and tried moving out a bit, and just as he ran out of air, knew that he was going to have a blow soon, he saw the handle sticking out of the mud. He made one grab, missed, reached again, and felt his fingers close on the rubber. He clutched it, and in one motion slammed his feet down into the mud and powered himself up. But now his lungs were ready to explode, and he had the flashes of color in his brain, explosions of color, and he would have to take a pull out of the water. Take it into his lungs, and just as he opened his mouth to take it in and pull in all the water in the lake, his head blew out of the surface and into the lake. It was as if a balloon had exploded. Old air blew out of his nose and mouth, and he pulled new in again and again. He reached for the side of the raft and hung there, just breathing until he could think once more. The hatchet, clutched and shining in his right hand. All right, still the plane. He went back to the hole in the fuselage and began to chop and cut again, peeling the aluminum skin off in pieces. It was slow going because he was careful, very careful with the hatchet. But he was hacked and pulled until he had opened a hole large enough to pull his head and shoulders in and look down into the water. It was very dark inside the fuselage, and he could see nothing. Certainly no sign of the survival pack. There were some small pieces and bits of paper floating on the surface inside the plane. Dirt from the floor of the plane that had floated up, but nothing substantial. Well, he thought, did you just expect it to be easy? So easy that way? Just open her up and get the pack, right? He would have to open it much more, so he could poke down inside and see what he could find. The survival pack had been a zippered nylon bag, or perhaps canvas of some kind, and he thought it had been red. Was it gray? Well, that didn't matter. It must have been moved when the plane crashed, and it might be jammed under something else. He started chopping again, cutting the aluminum away in small triangles, Sorry, this chapter just gets really good. He started chopping again, aluminum, bits of metal, fish arrowheads or lures maybe, and when he finally finished again, he had cleaned away the whole side and top of the fuselage that stuck out of the water, had cut down into the water as far as he could reach, and had a hole almost as big as he was, except that it was crossed and crisscrossed with aluminum, or it might be steel, you couldn't tell. Braces and formers and cables. It was an awful tangled mess, but after chopping some braces away, there was room for him to wiggle through and get inside. He held back for a moment, uncomfortable with the thought of getting inside the plane. You guys, he's going to go inside the plane! Oh, this is really... Hold that thought. I feel like... we're inside the plane. Sorry, I lost my spot. Oh yeah, you couldn't tell. Braces, formers, and cables. It was an awful tangled mess. But after chopping some braces away, there was room for him to wiggle in and get inside. He held back for a moment, uncomfortable with the thought of getting inside the plane. What if the tail settled back to the bottom and he got caught and he couldn't get out? It was a horrible thought, but then he reconsidered. The thing had been up for 2 days, plus a bit, and he had gone hammering and climbing on it, and it hadn't gone back down. It seemed pretty solid. He eeled in through cables and formers, wiggling and pulling until he was inside the tail, with his head clear of the surface in his water and his legs down on the angled floor. When he was ready, took a deep breath, pushed along the floor with his legs, feeling for some kind of fabric, some kind of cloth. Or anything with his bare feet. He touched nothing but the floor plates. Up, a new breath, he reached down to formers underwater and pulled himself beneath the water, his legs pushing down and almost to the backs of the front seats. And finally, on the left side of the plane, he thought he felt his foot hit the cloth canvas. Up for air! Deep breathing, and with one more grab at the formers, pushing as hard as he could, and he jammed his feet down and hit again. Definitely heavy canvas or heavy nylon. And this time when he pushed his foot, he thought he felt... Oh, I forgot about this part. Oh my goodness. Okay, sorry. I forgot this happened right on this page. He thought he felt something inside it, something hard. Okay, what do you think this is? You guys, this is like gonna blow your mind when you find out what it actually is. It had to be the bag. Driven forward by the crash, it was jammed into the backs of the seats and caught on something. He tried to reach for it and pull, but he didn't have the air, so he went up and went for more. Lungs filled in great gulps, he shot down again, pulling on the formers until he was almost there. Then the wheel down, head first, he grabbed at the cloth. It was the survival bag. Well, just wait. Sorry, that was a pause in the story. Just wait. It was a survival bag. He pulled and tore at it to loosen it, and just as... Oh, this is so disgusting. I'm sorry. Just as it broke free and his heart leaped to feel it rise, he looked up above the bag, and in the light coming through the side window, the pale green light from the water, he saw the pilot's head. Only it wasn't the pilot's head any longer. The fish. He never really thought of it, but the fish. The fish he had been... Get ready, this gets gross. The fish, he's thinking, well, they had to be eating all this time, too. They had been eating, and they'd been at the pilot this whole time. Almost 2 months nibbling and chewing, and all that remained was not that quite clean skull, and when he looked up, it wobbled loosely. Oh, too much, he said, too much. His mind screamed in horror, and he slammed back and was sick in the water. Sick so that he choked on it, and he tried to breathe water and could have ended there. Ended with the pilot where it almost ended when they first arrived, except that his legs jerked. It was the instinctive fear more than anything else. Fear of what he had seen, but they jerked and pushed, and he was headed up when they jerked, and he shot to the surface, still inside the birdcage of the formers and cables. His head slammed into a bracket as he cleared, and he reached up to grab it and was free in the air, hanging up in the tail. He hung that way for several minutes, choking and heaving and gasping for air, fighting to clear the picture of the pilot from his mind. It went slowly. He knew it would never completely leave, but he looked to the shore, and there were trees and birds. The sun was getting low and golden over his shelter, and when he stopped coughing, he could hear the gentle sounds of evening, the peace sounds, and the bird sound, and the breeze in the trees. The peace finally came to him, and he settled his breathing. He was still a long way from being finished. He had a lot of work to do. The bag was floating next to him, but he had to get out of the plane and onto the raft, then back to shore. He wiggled out through the formers. It seemed harder than when he came in. He pulled the raft around. The bag fought him. It was almost as if he didn't want to leave the plane. He pulled and he jerked, still wouldn't fit, and at last he had to change the shape of it, rearranging what was inside by pushing and pulling at the sides until he had narrowed it and made it longer. Even when it finally came, it was difficult, and he had to pull first at one side. Sorry, there's all these flying bugs in here. He finally got the bag out, tied it on top of the raft. It was nearly dark. He was bone tired from working in the water all day, chilled deep, and he still had to push the raft to the shore. Many times he thought he wouldn't make it. With the added weight of the bag, which seemed to get heavier by the foot, coupled with the fact that he was getting weaker all the time, the raft barely seemed to move. He kicked and pulled and pushed, taking the shortest way straight back to the shore, hanging to rest many times, then surging again and again. It seemed to take forever, and when at last his feet hit the bottom, he could push against the mud and slide the raft into the shore weeds to bump against the bank. He was so weak. He couldn't stand, had to crawl. So tired he didn't even notice the mosquitoes that tore into him like a gray, angry cloud. He had done it. That's all he could think now. He had done it. He turned and sat on the bank with his legs in the water, pulled the bag ashore, and began the long drag. He couldn't lift it. Back down the shoreline to a shelter. 2 hours. Almost 3, he dragged and stumbled in the dark, brushing the mosquitoes away, sometimes on his feet, more often on his knees, finally to drop across the bag and to sleep when he made the sand in front of the doorway. He had done it. And that is the end of chapter 18. Only one more chapter left and the little thing at the end. First of all, gross chapter. I mean, I had forgotten it was at that certain spot, but yeah, visualizing that in your mind. Interesting. Anyway, peace out for now. You're awesome. Throw kindness like confetti.